Good evening, everybody, and good morning to everybody who's listening on Apple or Spotify. This is the Simple Handicap for Monday, December 30th. This is the NFL Week 18 opening lines reaction show. And if you'll notice, the recap has been left out of the reaction show. As we get to this time of the year, all of a sudden what happens the week prior becomes a little less significant as we're into Week 18, which is effectively a standalone season in its own right, as well as every playoff week sets up new matchups with teams getting eliminated. Going to talk about all the games as we go through the playoffs, but for the sake of this show, everybody's focus is on Week 18, and that's where I'm going to keep much of the focus. If you do have any questions specifically about what we just saw in Week 17, which I'll touch on as we go game by game, explaining everything that's going on for playoff scenarios, for different prices that we have seen, and I'll talk about the graphics in a second. But if you have anything, questions about Week 17, let me know in the chat. I will answer them as we go. Appreciate everybody who's been here for about 20 minutes as the Washington-Atlanta game goes into overtime. Washington gets to drive in OT to win and seal the game. Had a lot of folks watching in the chat as well, so good to have you back. Again, as you go along in the live stream, put your questions in the live chat, and I'll get to them if you have anything specific that you want to touch on. Scott McIntube, hope I got that right. Falcons +4 and moneyline bettors not feeling well. I put the same category with the Denver Broncos backers from yesterday. 2 OT games in about 27 hours. Go one very specific way. As a dog backer, you usually are getting those. Not so much in this one. Good to see Allison, John, B-Air, New World Blues, John Massey, Danny Llanos back, Gregory Pearson for another show as well. Hope everybody had a fantastic Christmas week and you are ready for the final week of the regular season. On the banners as we go, as I'll pull up the first banner to talk about Buccaneers Tampa Bay. You'll notice a couple of different numbers. I think this is the best way on Sunday at 8:45 p.m. Pacific, 11:45 p.m. Eastern time to think about the games. In the brackets, you will have the odds that are currently available for betting on the board. The second number to the right is last week's number on a neutral field, specified by the end. These are taken from a couple of different rating sources that I look at. This is what the number would have been made last week. And the reason I'm specifying last week is it's obviously not taking into account any of the scenarios that applied to the games in Week 18 with differing motivation, chances of sitting or starting. And it's just a number to illustrate where we would have been in a week that didn't have these implications compared to where we are now, so you can kind of make sense with what's going on. And then I have the playoff scenario. In this case, Tampa Bay wins the division with a victory. So you will see these for each of the games as we go, and hopefully it paints a pretty decent picture for where we should have been, where we're at now, and we'll talk about the ins and outs and some of the intricacies of this game specifically. So in this instance, Tampa Bay last week, 8.5 on the neutral. Current price, 13.5 at home, hosting the Saints in this game. Again, a win, and they are in. So you think about 8.5, adding Bucks home field, you're getting somewhere in that 2-point range. This is obviously bumped up further because of the circumstance where the Buccaneers need to get the win, but also something to think about in this game too. Injuries to Kendre Miller suffered on Sunday for the Saints. Also saw MVS re-aggravate his back injury. Derek Carr, Chris Olave, and Alvin Kamara were all practicing leading up to the Raiders game, but all were ruled out. I would be surprised in this instance if they're rushed back to play in the final week of a meaningless game for the Saints against the Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. And so not only are you discounting those guys, you're also discounting 2 other guys who are on the field today. And some of the post-game comments, Demario Davis talking about how dark of a time it is in New Orleans right now, and he's pleading with the fans to hang on and hold on. That loss for the Raiders, even though Rattler looked pretty decent in the first half, and there was definitely something going on offense, was really using his legs in the second half, completely suffocated. And you think about the Saints' continued decline. Now you add on some more injuries to that. You can kind of see how you're getting to this number. Question at this point, is it enough? Is it not enough? The way that the Buccaneers looked against the Panthers was certainly compounded with some turnovers, compounded with a bit of a snowball that was running away in the second half, and they had the punt block that was returned as well. Dominant performance for the Bucs. Offense continues to look dominant. This was a matchup that we saw played earlier in the season, much different number when we're thinking about the Buccaneers closing 3.5 on the road and that was a game that Rattler also started. And so we are in kind of a different world here for pricing, even though it is the same quarterback. Bucks won that first meeting 51-27. So it was dominant in that game, played earlier in that season as well. So something to think about as you're looking here. Buccaneers 13.5-point favorites. Pretty big number, but a lot at stake here for Tampa Bay. In these games, personally, my first instinct is always to try to see a way in with the team that has effectively nothing to play for or isn't the must-win team. Tough to get there with the Saints, the way that this team showed against the Raiders in that game where interim head coach Darren Rizzi was trying to get everybody up, and it just wasn't there in the second half, and now you have more injuries piling up as well. So tough to get there if you are looking at the Saints in this game, getting 13.5. Lots of comments. CMR says, just horrendous clock management all over the NFL today. We saw it twice in the last game. I don't understand why these organizations do not have someone whose sole job is to advise on it. I can't answer the latter part. I don't get it. Not taking the timeout at the end of the first half, especially at the end of the fourth quarter, inexcusable. I think there's reason, especially if we think back to the Broncos game as well, not going for two with what was at stake. Just a lot of conservative play calling. I can't explain the timeouts. I can't explain why teams don't have it. And it's not something that's difficult to learn or to understand or to come up with. And it's again, I'm with you. I don't get it. And I don't have a good take for it either as to why it was so different. So I can't tell you there. Jacob G is asking, where will you be for the Super Bowl? Circa in Las Vegas. I will be at home on the couch. The wife and I are moving the Tuesday after Super Bowl. Pretty big move for both of us. And so we'll be at home watching the game. Perhaps next year, a little bit more of a media appearance somewhere, media row, perhaps. I'll see what happens next year. But this year is a big family pivot coming. Well, 3 weeks from now is verifying and getting everything completed with. And then 6 weeks from now is basically the big day. So personal life kind of conflicting with that Tuesday afterwards, which will take us away. So we'll be watching home here at White Rock in BC. If anyone's in the area, you want to stop by, we'll have something on the grill. We'll have something in the fridge as well. If you are local and watching the show, feel free to come by. Place will be open up on the corner, and you can walk right in, grab a seat on the couch, and watch the game. Next game up that we have is Buffalo, -1 with a total of 41 on the road at New England. Again, for those of you just joining, the second number in the graphic is last week's number for a neutral field game, which would have been Buffalo -14. Big difference here. We're about 13 points under what that would have been expected to be. Buffalo closed -14 just a couple of weeks ago against New England in that game that was played in Buffalo. They won 24-21. Buffalo is locked into the number 2 seed. This number at this moment is clearly saying that the market is expecting the Buffalo Bills to sit starters. Now, there are a couple prominent Buffalo Bills accounts that cover the team. There was a laundry list of guys who the accounts are expecting to get a ton of run, was the wording that they used specifically. Ton of backups, ton of secondary guys. There were also comments about practice squad elevations and roster changes that should be expected. And so it's clear the way that this is trending. Josh Allen was asked post-game if he thought that he was going to be playing in this game. He said that's fully a coach's decision. We have seen McDermott over the course of his career be willing to play his guys a little bit in games like this. It hasn't necessarily been the full sit. I think about this game, and there's a couple things to kind of consider in this. One is the Josh Allen MVP push. I think he made a big statement today, which will hopefully be great for everybody who was watching the preseason awards predictions. How much does that matter? It's hard to say. Obviously, the playoffs and the Super Bowl is a much bigger thing to think about, and Josh Allen downplayed the importance of MVP in a big way. And the other thing to think about in this game is New England, now with how the results fell today, with the Raiders winning back-to-back, with the Giants winning, the Patriots are now in sole possession of the number 1 draft pick. If they lose this game, they pick first in April. When you consider the state of the Pats right now and the roster building that they're going through, potential coaching changes maybe happening in the offseason based on some speculation, that number one draft pick is going to be pretty important, whether it's a keep or whether it's trading for more assets to build up this roster. A lot of validity into that. Now, there have been tweets, not from any reliable sources yet, talking about Joe Milton. But the reason that Joe Milton was being brought up was because Drake May, in the game against the Chargers on Saturday, allegedly suffered a concussion. It's not being reported as such. It's being labeled as getting his bell rung. There are Twitter doctors who have seen the video, who have read the post-game commentary, have said, like, this seems like it could be a little bit more. Does this provide, I don't want to say it's an excuse, but does it provide an easier way to start perhaps Joe Milton in this game than bring back Drake May, who continues to play very hard, if it can be kind of labeled as an injury? With this game at -1 currently, I don't think it's a guarantee the Bills sit everybody for all 4 quarters. And I don't think it's a guarantee we see a Pats level of effort like we have seen the last couple of weeks with Drake May at quarterback, if he's able to go at all. Again, this is completely just reading through things and trying to decipher what is going on. If that was to be the case and it is not a Drake May game and you get the Bills starters for at least a little bit, I mean, this is obviously a number that is very low. I have a hard time, even with Bills starters not playing, really getting too pumped up about backing the Pats in this game at +1. I don't know how much of an appetite there's going to be for that in the market. To me, this is pretty low for how much we have. Obviously, you're looking at the screen, how big of an adjustment it is and where we're looking at. So something to consider. So again, the Hef is saying that is a weak take because the neurologist cleared him. So again, it's not a medical take. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm getting at the Pats as a staff with that as a possible excuse. Again, and that excuse word is being lightly. We've seen it consistently year after year. We've seen it in season as well. Rather than making the firm quarterback change and owning it as a staff, it's pushed off as a bit of an injury. Obviously, the incentive is to win games, but when you consider the Pats and the current state of where they are as a team, the number one pick becomes quite valuable for them. So this is not me trying to speculate and judge a medical opinion. This is just me saying, like, hey, here's a possible scenario where the Pats can lean on that as well. Next game up that we have is Chicago on the road at Green Bay. Green Bay, a 9-point favorite with a total of 40. Green Bay was -9 on last week's number on a neutral. Green Bay has no control on whether they finish 6 or 7 in the NFC. It is out of their hands. And so in some ways, when you're looking at this game, at least I am, it's not a game where it's a win and automatically guaranteed to improve any status. I do think there's probably some level of incentive to try to win to get the 6. So you end up avoiding Philadelphia, who has clinched the number 2 seed. There is a very dark and shallow path to where the Eagles can end up getting the 1 that I read that I still didn't fully quite grasp and understand. But as I'm looking at the playoff scenarios, it's pretty comfortable that we're going to see Philly at number 2. And if you're the Packers, you've played both the Rams and the Eagles earlier in the season, which could be 2 opponents based on how these seedings look like they are going to fall. But I would believe, just given the Packers, how they set up defensively, there's probably a bit of an incentive to try win to give yourself the best chance of getting the 6 to avoid going into Philadelphia as the 2 seed. Now, again, talking about this number, 9 on a neutral, currently -9 at home, closed -6 at Chicago in week 11. I don't get the impression out of anything that has been said so far, pregame, postgame, from any of the reporters that the Packers are viewing this game as a sit everybody type of game. There were other 2 accounts that I saw that were pretty prominent. They were speculating based on how the game went today against Minnesota. LaFleur is treating this game to get things a little bit more adjusted on offense. My big takeaway from the Packers today was very much noticeable of an absence is Christian Watson. And that's maybe an easy and obvious thing to say, but lots of film review from film guys that I trust in the last couple of weeks have really showed how when he has been back on the field, how much it opens up everything else downfield for other guys in this offense to operate. And we saw Minnesota, with the return of Ivan Pace and that defense that looked really good, kind of suffocate all the explosive plays with Watson not on the field. And so his status still questionable for this game. I think it's a 50-50 shot that he is going to be able to go. We'll see how he is treated throughout the week. And I think that's a pretty good barometer to look at when you're trying to consider, what are we getting out of Green Bay in this game? What type of effort is it going to be? And is there any truth to what LaFleur has said in terms of the Bears and what we're getting from them? Every time I've watched the Bears the last couple of weeks, I just see a head coach that is not qualified to be a head coach in any way. And it's been very detrimental to the Bears, whose ratings continue to slide and continue to plummet. This number in week 18 starts to look a hair long, I would say, if Watson is not out there. Something to just kind of keep in mind is I think that's a good barometer to kind of look and gauge what type of effort we're getting and what we might expect from the Green Bay Packers in this game. Miami -2.5 with a total of 40.5 on the road at the New York Jets. Miami was -2 on the last week number, and that number included Tua in the game. And so Miami wins the game, gets a loss from Denver. They would be in the playoffs. In this game specifically, we were seeing last week's number -2 on a neutral now be the number plus half a point on the road in New York. And there's a lot of questions and things to try to figure out and try to decipher. The first thing I want to point out was the tweet from Underdog compared to what was actually said by Jeff Ulbrich in the presser regarding Aaron Rodgers starting in this game did not match. Underdog pulled the wrong quote. That wrong quote was probably something seen by a lot more bettors than the actual press conference itself. Jeff Ulbrich said he anticipates Rodgers starting in this game. Underdog said Rodgers will start in this game. And so there was a difference. Why I think the difference is worth thinking about as we sit here on a Sunday evening is Rodgers in the fourth quarter allegedly benched himself. There's kind of conflicting videos and reports on what happened. The most prominent video and source that's being talked about is that Rodgers took himself out and told Tyrod to go in the game. If that's true, all of a sudden I start to look at the comments from DJ Reed, who refused to answer the question in his post-game presser about whether or not guys on the team were quitting, a little bit more seriously. I think about Sauce Gardner's Instagram posts later on this evening about not wanting to go to New York. I start to think about those a little bit more seriously. And I also think about some of the comments that were made from offensive skill players, specifically Garrett Wilson, about wanting to trade if Rodgers was going to return and what that starts to look like in the locker room. So not a certainty, I would say, that Rodgers is going to start. I think there's a very good chance that he will. But how does what happened in the fourth quarter, down 40-0 against the Buffalo Bills, carry over into this week with some of the fallout that we have seen from other players? Mike McDaniel in the postgame presser, to me, oddly said that Tua does not require surgery. When I start to think about Tua's status in this game, and I'm seeing surgery referenced to an injury that kept him out and was something that was seemingly down to the wire, as McDaniel allegedly came into this game with two different game plans because he didn't know until last minute who was going to be starting at quarterback. When I hear surgery referenced, that doesn't give me a lot of optimism about a quarterback with a pretty detailed injury history being able to come back and play on a week turnaround. It's not a word that you typically see referenced with a quick turnaround. Obviously, in this game, very important for Miami. Have to go out and get a win, but I mean, that's quite a term to be thrown around by McDaniel in the postgame presser. So this number is kind of a tricky one to gauge right now at 2.5. If Tua was healthy and Tua was starting, you're looking at this and you're saying that it is short. But if this is going to be another Huntley game and it's 2.5 adjusted up a half point from 2, which would have been the Tua number, well, we've seen on two different occasions this season, Tua in versus out has reflected about a 4.5 point difference in the number. We saw it back going on the road to Seattle, and then we saw it today slightly lessened against Cleveland. So this obviously is adjusted back from where we would have been last week with Tua, pricing in a lot of this spot for Miami in this game. What are we going to get from Tua? Something you have to wait and see what we get. Before we get to the next one, just a couple of questions that we need to see here. Michael says, hey, Adam, I'm a newbie. I appreciate you coming in for a live stream on a Sunday evening. I've been following you for years. Thank you, and I'm grateful for all of your input. I appreciate you stopping by, as do I, the 160 folks who are watching here very late on the East Coast, getting pretty late in the Pacific time zone as well. So I appreciate everybody coming in, and I also appreciate Michael joining in for the live stream for the first time as well. So thanks for stopping by, and thanks for joining in. John, Garrett Wilson just wants to run his QB. That comment was a little bit odd to me as well, where he was really hyping up Taylor as the professional and what it's like. It was an indirect jab, clearly, at Rodgers. But it seemed, I mean, nothing's out of place for the Jets this season. But yeah, I mean, that certainly was an odd comment to hear from him when you're right, that he absolutely wants him in there. Next game up is Cleveland on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens 17.5-point favorites with a total of 42.5. Last week's number would have been Baltimore -13 on a neutral. Ravens get the 3 seed with a win, so no shortage of incentive for the Ravens in this game as massive favorites hosting Cleveland. Not much to say about this one. 13 to 17.5 with home field advantage playing for the 3 makes a lot of sense when we think about earlier in the season. Baltimore closed as a 7-point favorite on the road at Cleveland against Jameis Winston. So this number, for what it is and the game that it is, it's not out of line at all. DTR has looked like the quarterback he was last year when the switch happened a couple weeks ago. We were talking about him just slightly ahead of PJ Walker, 46 to 47 qualifiers. It hasn't been any better in his 2 games so far starting for the Cleveland Browns, and I don't know what the expectation could be different here starting against the Baltimore Ravens and that defense that continues to improve. Just not a lot there that you're getting from this Browns offense whatsoever. And we saw them today against a Dolphins team starting the backup quarterback and a defense that's had its fair share of issues, especially defending the run the last couple of weeks. Not be able to do a whole lot. Did have a turnover on downs close to the goal line, but still, I mean, DTR is not fit to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. Weather certainly suppressed things a little bit, no question about that. But this is by no means a matchup where you can have much of a high expectation whatsoever for the Cleveland Browns and their offense in this spot. So at 17.5, I would say it's a very fair adjustment for what the game is, as well as what the scenario is. Kansas City on the road at the Denver Broncos. Broncos 9-point favorites with a total of 38.5. And you're seeing very clearly what's widely known. It was reported by Jay Glazer before games kicked off today that the Kansas City Chiefs are planning on sitting starters. There's no indication as to what starters are going to be sat. It's just been referenced that they're going to be sitting guys. This is not something that was a surprise either, because listening to Mahomes' pressers going back 2 weeks, he was talking about how once they clinch the 1 seed, that's when everybody's going to get a chance to take a break, take a rest, and then get ready for the playoff run, which the Chiefs certainly need with some of the injuries to Mahomes and others that they're at least nursing. Whether or not it's full-blown injuries is certainly speculated online, but it's a clear rest spot for the Chiefs. Now, the question is, who is all resting? Because when you think about this, 4 on the last week number with everybody expected to play, we're now 90 other way in Denver, obviously important, and the Broncos get the 7 seed with a victory. So massive game for Denver at home, the biggest that they've had in nearly a decade. Chiefs likely to be resting everybody, but how far is too far for some of these adjustments? And this, to me, of all the big adjustments that we're seeing on the board this week, and for all of the numbers that are kind of having that premium or that tax put on them, this seems like the most well-known and most well-accepted, and obviously the most anticipated from a number perspective. So we've seen so far in week 17, these numbers get bet up pretty high late. Favorites covering at a pretty alarming rate down the stretch as well. So how much higher does this end up going? I don't know if I'd be super comfortable laying double digits with Denver, even against Chiefs backups with Wentz. I'll talk about some of the Chiefs' incentive stuff on offense coming up and how they've handled those as well. I think that becomes a little bit interesting to watch too. Questions about the backups in Kansas City. It would be a Carson Wentz start for the Chiefs. And like, again, obviously going to be a lot of backup skill guys. Like that's a lot for Wentz. That's a lot for Wentz, certainly. LA Chargers -5.5, total 41 on the road at Las Vegas. We are seeing this -6 as the last week number for the Chargers. This is now 5.5 on the road in Las Vegas. I'm not putting a big premium on home field whatsoever for the Raiders. And so this is effectively a slight adjustment down considering the Chargers, some of the health issues they've had coming into the end of the season. I would say a very slight expectation in this number that they may be sitting. But I think what we're seeing here with this adjustment down is just the way that the Raiders have been finishing out this season. Back-to-back weeks where they have been very much bought in for their head coach, Antonio Pierce, even with the travel delays that they had going into the game against the Saints with only 12 hours arrival before kickoff. That was a team that still got out and still played very, very hard. There was some interesting post-game commentary, just kind of reflecting the overall spot and nature of this team at the moment. It was talking about how even after the win against the Saints, it was Vic Tafur, I believe, was talking about how emotional the players were, how bought in they were. Antonio Pierce post-game was pumped as usual, but he was getting backing from players who were talking about how important it was to get these wins for their coach down the stretch. It was reported before the Saints game that his job status is very much in doubt for next year, and the players are really responding to it. And we've seen two pretty energetic efforts from the Raiders with obviously a lot of draft position to lose and effectively nothing to play for, in air quotes. They've looked anything but down the stretch. And so if this is a game where the Chargers, a little bit of foot off the gas, and you have the Raiders still fully bought in and playing hard, I think that's kind of what we're seeing here in this number as well. Now, I say the Chargers likely number 6 because they have specific tie breaks against them from Pittsburgh and Baltimore, but also are ahead of possibly Denver in the 7 spot. The way that it broke down, again, this is one of the handful this week that isn't like a team in or out, but like what would have to happen, similar to how the Rams were able to clinch the division tonight. There's like 3 or 4 things that would need to happen for the Chargers to go from the 6 to the 5. It just seems very unlikely. So I had them labeled likely the 6, and I think they would approach this as well going into the final week. Jacksonville on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. This is both teams eliminated from the playoffs. Last week number was Indy -3. Current number -5.5 with a total of 44.5. Likely to be a Flacco game, perhaps. The way that Richardson's injury was reported post-game, Steichen was pressed on it during his interview after the loss, and he says that it turned into spasms, and the injury was misreported. He says he has to go back and review how he spoke about the injury because it was not his intention to misreport the injury, but when he was pressed with the question, he acknowledged that it was, which to me, watching the presser, made it seem like that was something that perhaps was a little bit more serious for Richardson than what it was led on to be during the week, which I think caused a little bit of surprise coming out of nowhere. But if this is a spasm issue and he has his injury history, that could possibly lead to him less likely to play than what was initially reported last week in this game in Week 18. Now, we didn't see a significant difference in the market for the two quarterbacks, so I don't think you're getting a big shift here whether it is either guy, especially in a game where neither team has anything playoff-wise to play for. So this is a number that effectively we look at the last week number on a neutral, a very fair price for an adjustment without any bump one way or the other at 5.5 with a total in this game of 44.5. Takeaway on the Jags specifically, still you're getting a ton of effort from Thomas. You're getting a ton of effort from Washington. Also, Mac Jones today was a very willing runner in the first half, was showing a different side of things. Visuals of Press and Peterson on the sidelines were very, very loose. And like in a game that I watched a good portion of, the Jags were still very clearly running real plays. The Titans in the first half were not. There was one team running an offense. There was one team that was not. Not a lot of explosiveness for the Jags. Could not get anything going on the ground run-wise. But once they tried to push the ball downfield against that injured Titans secondary, a lot of play potential made. And Mac Jones, for all the criticism that he gets, rightfully so, made some awesome throws in that game against the Tennessee Titans that were right on the spot. And so I think the Jags taking on a bit of a different light these last couple of weeks than perhaps how they're perceived in the market. Steichen was questioned about his job security, says he can control what he can control. It's going to be up to ownership in the offseason for what they want to do with him. And I don't know. And Rudy says Mac Jones out there playing like it's the Super Bowl since he came in. You're very right, Rudy. Like, he made some great throws today. And I don't know. The one thing that kind of concerns me here is, like, if I'm thinking about a way in for Jacksonville and what do we get matchup-wise, this, if it is a Flacco start, probably is his last career start, I would think. I would imagine. I mean, he's on the field just throwing it anywhere that he wants, pushing it downfield. Even in that pick, forced out of the pocket a little bit, it's a sidearm heave 25 yards downfield. This Colts offense takes on a very different look with him. Against this Jags defense, there's going to be potential for him to find bigger plays with that mentality. So that worries me a little bit in this, for sure. I would say is the one, like, big glaring negative looking at this with Jacksonville. Couple games that don't have numbers yet. Carolina, Atlanta. Atlanta must win. Tampa Bay must lose for Atlanta to get to division. Tampa Bay, as we talked about at the top, a 13.5-point favorite. Carolina, I think, kind of changed gears in week 17. They were playing very hard week 13, 14, 15 with Young switching, had some tough breaks against very tough opponents, but all of a sudden it's shutting down Chuba Hubbard. It's Horn not being rushed back. It's multiple injuries on the defensive side. It's the O-line banged up a little bit. Felt like a different Panthers team and a much different sort of feeling around what was visibly put on field against the Buccaneers earlier today than what we've seen the last couple of weeks. And so I do think that changes. Atlanta, I thought, against Washington, got away from the run early second half. We'll talk about the timeouts. It was a mismanagement. They should have had a better opportunity for a kick. The overtime drive, they couldn't get off the field. Some bad 3rd and 22 penalty that ended up giving Washington the first down, really flipped the game. But I thought they were running it exceptionally well in the first half. They were hitting throws when needed. And Penix, again, the word that was used for him last week was poised. You're seeing that again. It opens up the offense. They got away from the run quite a bit in those first two drives in the second half. They couldn't sustain anything. And then the defense, with that pressure, my takeaway through the third quarter, like kind of midway, was Raheem Morris had been reported today to really spending a lot more time with the defense, which is obviously his specialty. And so he's kind of not stepped away from head coaching, but he's allocated his time differently the last couple weeks to focus more on defense. The Falcons, since week 13, lead the NFL in sacks. Anyone that has listened to this podcast for the entire season knows for the first 3 months, the Falcons couldn't get any pressure at all and couldn't get any sacks. And so my takeaway in that game, the way it was going, 17-7 at the half, and Atlanta looked like they were forcing the punt and how much success they were having running the football. My takeaway was, here's this defense that Morris perhaps has completely changed, got a ton out of the pass rush, flipped that around. You have the run game opened up with Penix, and you have a suitable downfield passer, unlike Cousins. It's like, this is a scary team. And with those Bucks South futures, I was like, this is going to need a lot of luck in week 18. And then everything fell apart in the last 20 minutes of the game. And now I don't know how the Falcons come into this game. That defense was on the field for a ton of time in that, but also you have a Panthers team here that may be switching gears as well. I don't have a number on this game yet as we're sitting here. It is not opened up anywhere. I would expect Atlanta in that 7 to 8 point range as a number that we could see in this one. Washington on the road at Dallas. This is not open yet as well. Washington clinches the playoff spot. Dallas obviously eliminated. The Dallas Cowboys offense without CeeDee Lamb is all kinds of trouble. That is a big downgrade with Cooper Rush running that offense. Is this a spot where the Cowboys play up for Jerry at home? Like he's called them out a couple times the last few weeks for these home games to push an effort. What do we get from Washington off of the clinching spot? That's a massive win for them. That is a massive season milestone with the rookie quarterback and the first-time coaching staff. I mean, massive win for them at home with a crowd that we haven't seen in Washington in years for that. So you look at this as letdown, but my goodness, what do you get out of that Cowboys offense at all? So we'll see from that. Cincinnati, -2.5 with a total of 47 on the road at Pittsburgh. We all know what this one entails. Cincinnati win plus Denver loss. Cincinnati is in. There's also Pittsburgh in, but they cannot be the 7 seed in the AFC. So both teams with incentives. Pittsburgh needs a win and a Baltimore loss to get the division and the home playoff game. So this is both teams full go, nothing held back in this game. One of the few games that we see on the board that is going to be lined as if it is a regular game, and we're seeing Cincinnati bumped up as Joe Burrow and this offense continues to play at a ridiculous level. In this game specifically, there was a meeting between these two back in week 14. Cincinnati closed -3 at home. Now on the road with the venue flip, they're the team that's getting bumped up in the ratings. They're the team that's getting increased in price as well. This is going to be somewhat schedule dependent. There were tweets that were sent out that speculated that all of the AFC games with meaning are going to be played at the same time in the afternoon time slot on Sunday. If it has been announced differently since it's we've gone on air here, do let me know in the chat. But there was a tweet speculating that these were all going to be the Sunday afternoon games, which would keep it equal. So there's no knowledge of what's happening otherwise. So that could be a factor that may adjust this a little bit or force it to look at differently if the league were to schedule it at a different time. We'll see what comes of that. But as it stands now, we're seeing a little bit of a premium, and rightfully so, put on the Bengals offense looking at this game. Joe English is asking about Chase Brown. Do not have an update there on what his status is going to be. So that's obviously an impactful injury for the Cincinnati Bengals in this game. Seattle, LA, Rams clinched the playoff spot or the division win with the Washington Commanders win. This game is not fully opened yet. There is a high speculation with the Rams locked in that we could see starters sitting the way that McVay was hinting at it. There's nothing confirmed yet, but there's some issues on the O-line. You think about Cooper Kupp and how he is slowed down. Could absolutely use the week of rest. We'll see what they do at Stafford. This game is obviously going to depend much on that. We don't have any numbers posted on this yet for point spreads or totals. We'll have to wait and see with an update later in the week on this one. San Francisco, Arizona fits that same category with both of these teams. San Francisco plays Monday night. Arizona lost on the road at LA 13-9 on Saturday. We don't have a number here as we don't know what we're getting from the Niners. What I can say here, San Francisco clearly shutting guys down heading into week 17. Ward is going to miss on Monday Night Football with personal issues. I don't know if it was an issue or if he had the baby. There's something with the family going on that's going to keep him out of that game. So his status would be one to monitor. But obviously, you have just a mountain of O-line issues for the 49ers. And so there's a lot to look at and a lot to watch for here. But both teams eliminated, nothing to play for, and the 49ers on the short week. I'm seeing that the Bengals are the Saturday game that is being said in the chat. It is the late game on Saturday night. Ravens go early Sunday. I wonder why on earth they would do that. So that makes that game look different for sure. It also makes that Baltimore game look a lot different as well with the bigger point spread, because if Cincinnati were to win, then that Baltimore game obviously changes a lot incentive-wise. If you get the Pittsburgh win, at least when we're thinking about like first quarter, first half numbers for Baltimore and the importance of that game, getting the home playoff game and the division, obviously you're not anticipating a Ravens loss in that spot. But for what we might see Ravens do personnel-wise, you all of a sudden have that incentive change because of that possible result that you could see Saturday night. So I'm surprised to see that they would put the Bengals on Saturday. That's an interesting choice by the league for sure. Am I reading that right in the chat? Mario Metz is saying it. ESPN is showing Bengals Saturday. Danny is saying the same, that it's released. So that is it, not being played concurrently is an interesting choice for how they were handling that. Houston on the road at the Tennessee Titans. Titans -5 with a total of 36.5. This is a big adjustment that is very much anticipating the Texans sitting starters. The last week number for Houston would have been 5.5 on a neutral. This game is being played in Tennessee. Houston is locked in at the 4 seed in the AFC. I have not seen anywhere, and I spent a lot of time looking for it, any indication or any hinting from any of the Texans staff anywhere that they are going to sit starters in this game. Unlike speculation from Kansas City, which is, a lot more concrete than speculation, but speculation from Buffalo, speculation from the Rams, speculation from other teams. I haven't seen it anywhere for Houston. And the number is being priced like it is a certainty that they're going to be sitting guys. Now, you think about a team like Houston who is locked in, like I get it, why that could be the case. They've played 3 games in 10 days, which they refer to as the gauntlet out of the bye. But when I was thinking about this game initially, I was like, okay, it makes sense that that could happen. But if I'm putting myself on the Texan side of things, they just lost Tank Dell, who's a massive part of their offense. They're down, obviously, Diggs from earlier in the season. The offense has got nothing the last couple of weeks against playoff caliber opponents. To me, this is a game where it is a perfect opportunity to at least try get some things right and to try get some things going. In my mind, that upside outweighs sitting everybody and getting rest. Is an extra week going to solve the offensive problems? I certainly don't think so. So I would say when I'm looking at this, like I'm a little bit surprised to see this being priced like it is a full Houston sit and that the Titans are getting respect in this game. I just watched a Titans team not run any real offensive plays against the Jags for the first 2.5 quarters. It was check downs. It was quick, short throws. It was get the ball to Spears as much as possible, who, by the way, is injured and will not play in this game. You take Spears and his production out of that offense, the Titans offense did nothing against a horrible Jags defense. And it's a team that hasn't been competitive and hasn't been able to cover a number all season long. The first team in NFL history to not cover 14 games in a season. And now they're laying 5 like it's a guarantee Houston is sitting everybody. It seems a little bit extreme. This is not me saying that, hey, Houston is going to play everybody. I don't have that info. I just have nothing, and I don't see or read anything anywhere that is suggesting that Houston is going to be sitting all of their starters. I just haven't seen it yet. So I find that a little bit intriguing that this has gone all the way the other way without anything concrete or any sort of rumors being out there at all. The Hef says Houston money line for the first half, Tennessee full game. Interesting wager. The Hef is also throwing out Pittsburgh money line, Las Vegas money line, Cincy money line, LA Chargers money line. And that would be directly applying the correlation of what happens in the Saturday game to what is happening on the Sunday game. Good call there. Joe English says maybe they were planning to have the AFC North Division Championship play early game on Saturday of the wild card weekend. Now you're getting to different levels here that I haven't got to. So I'm leaving that burden on you, Joe. If that is in fact the case, I guess it could make sense for sure. Minnesota on the road at Detroit. Lions a 3-point favorite with a total of 52. Obviously, we know what is at stake here. The winner gets the 1 seed in the NFC. The loser is the 5 seed. Massive difference between the two. obviously everything at stake for the whole season. Dan Campbell said that he is going to play everybody against San Francisco on Monday Night Football. The Lions come in on the short week. Campbell is not taking any days off. It was a press conference he did last season, late in December, that said his players can rest when the season is over. And so there are no indications anywhere that the Lions are going to sit or rest anybody against San Francisco. That game at San Francisco is actually taken on a bit of a different light because Campbell has done some interviews this week where he's talking about how much it means to avenge the playoff loss and the embarrassment that they suffered last year in San Francisco and getting that right on Monday. I think about the Cowboys game earlier in the season and how he pushed it to the limit with some of the play calls that he was getting to avenge that spot and that loss that they suffered. I mean, it is what he is. He's the emotional head coach that lives for spots like that. And there's been some pretty compelling articles that have gone around about how much the game against San Francisco means. And so I think there's some indecisiveness in the market on how that's going to be handled for the Lions on Monday Night Football. We've seen that go from 3.5 to 4 right as the Minnesota game was finishing. The 4s got taken out, is now back to a softer 3.5. I mean, it's a market to keep an eye on to see how that's being treated. Obviously, a massive game coming up in 6.5 days now as we're speaking. And it doesn't seem like the Monday Night Football is having much of a correlation on this game, even with the Minnesota win, is what I am getting at. And so this is a game, one of the few that we'll likely be able to talk about throughout the week and talk about more later in the week as well. New York Giants on the road at the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles, a 3.5-point favorite with a total of 38.5. Last week number was Philadelphia minus 15 on a neutral. Philadelphia is the number 2 seed. Again, there is a very interwoven path with like 3 or 4 games where they could end up the 1 seed. Seems very unlikely. For simplicity's sake, Philly's going to be the 2 seed, likely in all likelihood. 15 down to 3.5 kind of tells you a lot about what you need to know here. Is this going to be a game where Jalen Hurts is going to come back right away with the concussion that he is dealing with, which could be concussion number 2 of the year? Probably not. We also have some direct quotes from players that stood out. A.J. Brown did an interview post-game with Mike Garafolo, and he was saying that because of the win, he went to say the team, but he caught himself and he put it on he. And he's like, he deserved with the win the opportunity to rest in week 18 and get ready for the playoffs. And so he kind of let it out of the bag that the Eagles are looking at sitting guys. Now, the exception to this possibly is going to be Saquon Barkley, who is 101 yards away from the rushing record for a season to break Dickerson's record. Nick Sirianni was asked about it during the press conference. He said Barkley, he referenced we'll see on whether or not Barkley was going to be able to play or not and get the opportunity to break that record. Some Eagles players were saying that they wanted him to be able to go out and do it, especially so doing it against his old team. So you might see perhaps Barkley get a little bit of extra time. Maybe there's some early starter stuff for the Eagles that don't include some of the skill guys, but maybe the O-line guys to give a bit of a cushion. That could be something that stands out. We have Aaron Jones, the quad contusion. That is a great call as well, something to deal with. He said post-game that he believes that he can play, or it was either him or a coach that referenced that. And so that stood out as well. Also, Kenny Pickett was playing with broken ribs. Darius Slay confirmed it post-game, which was an odd way for that news to come out. Those obviously will not be fixed for this game if Pickett is, in fact, going to be the starter for the Eagles on Sunday. So a lot of things to consider there. When we talk about just some general incentive stuff that I know is going to be popular, but just kind of curating all of that together, we talked about Barkley, 101 yards needed for the single season rushing record. He got 32 carries in the game today. It's clearly a priority for the Eagles to give him an opportunity to get it. I would expect his over to come in the high 100, 109, 110, 111, in that range. It's going to be a very big number. It's probably going to be the most bet over prop of the entire season. Certainly, perhaps there's a larger time frame which that could apply to. that is going to just get hammered to the over unless there is like clear indication midweek that everybody is sitting and he has no chance for the record. If there's any indication he is going to play, that is going to be a very high total, and it's going to be bet up pretty significantly. Geno Smith has probably the biggest monetary incentive I have ever seen for a quarterback in a single week. There's $4 million for him personally on the line if he throws for 185 yards and completes 70% of his passes. There's a completion percentage mark that's set on his season whole numbers, and he's half a percentage point above it. It's like 69.8%. And so if he gets 70% roughly in this game, he's going to exceed that. I mean, it is a massive number for him. And so that's, I mean, usually you see these incentives 250, 350 for the mark. This one to be at 4 million was pretty substantial. And so you think about the Rams possibly sitting guys and approaching that game differently. And then you think about Geno in this game with all of that incentive and the Seahawks possibly approaching it in a different way. You get a bit of a conflicting scenario in that possibly occurring with some of the rest. The Chiefs with DeAndre Hopkins reminds me a lot of the Chris Jones spot a couple of years ago, where even though all the starters sat, they still let Chris Jones go out and get his sacks to earn $1 million. DeAndre Hopkins, if he can go for 149 and a touchdown, he gets an extra $1 million. And there's different breakdowns for each category in that. So it's not like that needs to be the overall stat line. But that stood out to me. Cortland Sutton, 82 yards for $500,000, which is big for him. You think about Denver in that game, obviously going to be very competitive with the playoffs on the line. Perhaps a little bit, not that there's going to be any lack of effort whatsoever. I always think those are kind of silly, but something to watch for Sutton with some of those prop numbers that come out. There's one for J.K. Dobbins. He's a pretty low play. He's a low paid guy relative to others in the league. 67 yards gets him a lot. He also just unlocked a big one against the Pats on Saturday. Zach Ertz did a whole bunch today to get that, so he's kind of out of his incentives. He qualified for all of them and earned a ton. And then the other one that stood out for me in a pretty big way, Baker Mayfield was asked post-game about Mike Evans, who needs 85 yards for a 1,000-yard season for 11 straight. And Mayfield was asked about it post-game, and he says that it is important for him to get it, but it is equally important to make sure that he and the team puts him in a spot where he can get it. Obviously, the Buccaneers need no extra motivation nor incentive to go out and have a good offensive performance and get Mike Evans the ball, as they have to win for the NFC South. But when you think about Evans against that Saints secondary, certainly potential there where he is going to be featured quite a bit. Now, I bring up all of those not to say that these teams are going to go out of their way in must-win playoff spots to get guys certain things in various spots. But in some of these, like the Evans one, like the Hopkins ones, perhaps, if he is able to go, and especially with the Geno one against the Rams, when you think about the difference in how both of those two teams might approach that game specifically, you get just a little bit of extra subjectivity to add to a week that is full of making subjective decisions and trying to estimate who is in and who is out and what kind of spot you might be expecting from teams to show in game. It's one of those weeks where, again, at the top, I said it's effectively a brand new season on its own that you have to look at. If you're curious in our upcoming releases, I don't know if we're going to have one first thing on Monday morning. The market is quite unstable. raspicks.com/NFL is where you can go. I would think we have 2 to 3 more releases the rest of the season. We had Kansas City and Pittsburgh over 42.5 on Christmas Day, ended up closing 46, and it was a painful one not to get over the total, which goes 0-1. Paid releases on the season, 43, 32-2, 57%. Overall, with the 3 free releases we did on game day earlier in the season, the NFL record for the year, 43, 35-2, 55.1%. So I would think we have, I would say, 2 to 3 more between now and the Super Bowl. That is prorated down under $100 on the website. If you want to get in on the home stretch with us, you can head over to raspicks.com/NFL. Again, usually we have the Monday morning one around 8:15 a.m. Pacific. I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath that there's going to be one that is stable enough to go out tomorrow morning, but we will keep everybody updated throughout the week. It'll probably be a very conservative and low volume week overall. I would not expect more than one release perhaps for this entire week if there is one at all. But I would probably anticipate, again, 2 to 3 more the rest of the season, including all the playoffs and including anything that might come out on the Super Bowl as well. So for all of the details for that, you can head over to raspicks.com/NFL. And hopefully we get 1 or 2 more wins down the stretch of the season to make it a decent year on NFL releases overall. All right, with all of that said, there's a lot going on for Week 18 in terms of the media schedule that you will be getting. It's the Simple Handicap podcast. Obviously, this is the Monday morning episode. I'll do an update tomorrow morning. New Year's Day is always a very tough day for folks to tune in and download with everybody having the holiday. And obviously a big focus on college football coming off of New Year's Eve. Not a lot of people getting up at 4, 5, 6 in the morning after New Year's Eve. So there won't be an episode on Wednesday. And then I will do an update later in the week on Thursday or Friday as well. And that will be kind of the update/preview for the week. And if you want to get notified for that, the subscription button is down below. It's free to subscribe to the YouTube channel. You'll get all of the updates. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, that will be uploaded to your podcast feed as well. And then for the playoffs, I think I'll treat things as I have done in seasons past. There will be the initial first thing, opening lines reaction to all of the playoff games. And then there will be a later week preview of all of the games that I'll go into more detail on matchups, talk about a little bit more on each of the games than I typically do on the Wednesday live stream previews. And we'll probably move that preview perhaps a day later in the weeks on Wednesday or Thursday, which will wrap everything up as we go. Just a few more weeks here in the NFL season, a few more weeks for the podcast as things now start to slow down a little bit as we get into the playoff season, with the schedules a lot lighter, as well as the media overall a lot lighter as well. So again, I appreciate everybody for stopping by here on the live stream this Sunday evening. If you want to know more about potential releases coming up, raspicks.com/NFL. There'll be an update sent out tomorrow morning with possible releases. And then there'll be an update here on the podcast feed tomorrow morning with a market rundown. Thanks everybody for stopping by. Have a fantastic Sunday night and Monday. We'll chat to you again bright and early tomorrow morning.